Welcome sports fans to Gen X Classic Sports, where we bring the nostalgia of our sports-filled youth into the present day. Do you remember when football players wore stickum? Do you remember when the NBA played defense? Do you remember when Wrigley Field turned on the lights? If so, then this podcast is for you. Grab your favorite retro jersey, crack open a cold one, and let's stroll down memory lane together. We're here to discuss iconic sports moments, teams, and athletes from our generation. This is Gen X Classic Sports, sports talk for GenXers by GenXers.
2, 1. Okay, welcome back to essay episode number. This will probably be number 6. I've got Tom and Steve with me here today. Gentlemen, I'm going to have you introduce yourselves. You can tell as much about yourselves as you want. First name, last name, whatever you prefer. Let's start with you, Tom. Where were you born and grew up, man?
I was born in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Grew up in Van Buren, right on the Oklahoma border.
And you are Tom.
I'm Tom.
And where did you and I meet?
We met at grad school.
We did, around 1993 in Little Rock, correct?
UALR.
All right, so you grew up in Van Buren. Does that mean you went to Van Buren High School, Tom?
I did. Go Pointers.
Go Pointers. All right, and you played football in high school, correct?
Yeah, I played. I did basketball and and football, and then high school was football.
Okay, and then you went to college here in Central Arkansas. We don't have to be specific, and then later on, you and I met each other, and we'll come back to you when we get some information out of Mr. Steve over here. Steve, introduce yourself and tell us where you were born and raised, my man.
Yep, Steve Brown, born in Searcy, Arkansas, and grew up in Augusta, Arkansas.
Augusta, and that'd be the
Mighty Red Devils.
Red Devils, yes. And that's more like a AA size school.
Yeah.
Tom,
actually 8-man football now.
Yeah. Tom, when you grew up, there were only 4 classes in Arkansas, and I'm guessing Van Buren was 3 or 4A at the 4A?
We were 3.
3? Okay,
Yep.
So Junction City was 2.
Augusta was 2.
Okay, and see, for the folks who don't know, where is Augusta basically in the state of Arkansas?
It's more northeast, a little more northeast central, just above Searcy.
Yeah, okay. And you had to be born in Searcy because that's where the hospital was.
That's where the hospital was, exactly.
I knew it. Well, and you were born in Fort Smith, you said, right? Okay. Yes. All right. So, Steve, you played high school football, I know.
Yep, football, ran track, actually was a pole vaulter.
Okay.
You can't tell by my body style now.
Did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's an assumption. And, oh, by the way, where did you and I meet? And you and I and Tom meet?
Yeah, the three of us met at work at Arkansas Systems in '97.
Yeah, we were all working at the same software company, and as tends to happen on the job, I think the sports fans kind of find each other pretty fast, right, with Razorbacks and all that going on. So it's pretty apparent that you're a sports fan, and we're going to get into detail on the next episode about what some of the stuff that led to. But basically, you two are big sports fans just like I am. So let me swing back around here to Tom. And Tom, can you talk a little bit about your family's background, if they are the people who brought you into being a sports fan or participant, or was it from some other factor? Did you pick it up on your own, or how did that kind of work for you as a kid?
Yeah, my family is not a big family of sports fans. So I started playing football at recess, like 2nd and 3rd grade, and we just got obsessed with it. And, one of us would bring a football to school every day, and every recess there was about 10 of us that would go out and play, like, touch football. And that was all we did. So then I started watching NFL, got obsessed with that. But, yeah, my dad didn't really play any sports, and I don't have a family history of sports. So,
about what age do you think? I know what you said, you were playing football on the playground, but was that about the same age you also started really paying attention in the media and so forth, or on TV of football as well?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Like all the Sunday, I don't even know who it was that did the Sunday, like, pre-games and stuff like that. But I just remember one episode was about, it was set in Pennsylvania, and it was, all about the linebackers and the hard-nosed, steel steel worker, hard like linebackers that came from that area, and that's how I really became a Steelers fan. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was the broadcast. It was TV that got me.
Not many Steelers fans in Van Buren, I'm guessing, but I don't know that. Steve, what do you remember about how far back can you remember being a kid? Not so much participating. Yeah, that's important too, but like seeing in the world around you through family or media or whatever. What do you remember about sports as a kid?
Well, I'm a little bit older than you guys, and so
Not by that much.
Not by that much, but a little bit. And so my perspective, not that it changed a great deal by the time you guys came along, but my family lived out in the country, and we got 3 channels, which we all did for a long time. But I distinctly remember becoming a Razorback fan early on, and back in those days, my parents subscribed to the Arkansas Gazette, and Orville Henry, who was a big, the big writer about the Razorbacks. I just remember waiting for the mailman to come to deliver the Gazette every day so that I could devour the sports section and, read, there would be 5 pages of Razorback coverage and just reading it cover to cover.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, my friend Wayne was in episode 2 talking about that very similar experience. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I've heard people say before, and I think I remember that Orville did like the post-game write-up that hit the paper Sunday, but I think it was Monday, was it, when he had the really big, massive breakdown of every little thing that happened kind of deal?
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
Was Monday was the real, the Sunday was the quick, dirty summary, who won, a few of the highlights and stuff like that. But Monday was the real in-depth analysis. And then the rest of the week was, it was stories about practice and about individual players. I mean, back in those days, they had a lot more access to the players. So you really, through Orville, you really got to know the players.
Yeah, and that's because Orville was right there with Frank Broyles every step of the way, getting all the information Frank wanted him to have,
Right.
and then whatever he didn't want him to have. So, Tom, what is that? How do you remember the Razorback influence? Because I knew Steve would say that, but I wasn't sure about you, honestly.
I watched more Razorback basketball than I did football growing
Back
up.
then, yeah.
So I remember the Sidney Moncrief and
Absolutely.
the triplets and those, but I guess I just wasn't really big into the Razorback football. You were talking about the media, and it reminded me. I had an uncle who got Sports Illustrated at the time, and so he would pass them to me. Like we'd see him at my grandma's house on Sundays, and he'd bring me a stack of like Sports Illustrated. So, and I still have them. I have
Really?
I have some really nice ones from the 70s. Yeah. I have like Gretzky and a lot of really cool covers on them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was the same way. I talked about it too much on an earlier episode, but I definitely was a big Sports Illustrated kid, and we talked about Sport Magazine and stuff like that. In El Dorado, or in Junction, we got the El Dorado paper, and but we also had access to the Democrat and the Gazette, so I definitely remember the Orville Henry write-ups. And I do remember guys going into the library on Monday and getting the sports page. I said something about this before where our library had a rack with a wooden pole. Do y'all remember that?
Yep.
And they took each section and strung it over a pole, and that sports one would disappear by about third period every day, usually, and especially on Monday. So I guess there's some common ground there for all of us for sure. And Tom, I didn't know that. I didn't know that you weren't as plugged in with the football program up there. But you do remember the Quinn Grovey years and all that when we were in you and I were in high school at the exact same time. So you remember the Quinn Grovey type stuff and all that, I'm sure a little. But I guess, was it 88 when they first went to the Final Four with Nolan's crew? Was that?
Yeah, because they want.
Or was it
no, it was
92,
90? The first Final Four.
That was in Denver?
Yeah, I think so.
That was
and then
Day and.
That was.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the first one was. Yeah, I guess it was.
Okay.
I guess it was.
Well, my point is,
They
Tom and
maybe
I were
remember.
either out of high school, just getting into college, and so the Razorback basketball at the time was sort of re-peaking after the Sutton years, right about then.
What's interesting on the basketball stuff, though, for me, because I was the opposite of you, Tom. I was, and rightfully so, when I was coming up, because Razorback basketball got no coverage at all, because they had never been, really any good at all until Sutton got there, and so in '78 when they made their first and only Final Four with Eddie. I distinctly remember them getting to the tournament. And there was a big deal when they beat UCLA, because UCLA was still a powerhouse, and they beat UCLA in, I think, the second round of the tournament. And how big of a deal that was for the state, and how much national press we got. Here comes nowhere. Nobody knows anything about Arkansas. And I think it was that game. I may be mistaken, but I think it was that game where Moncrief, Delph, and Brewer were coined the triplets by the national media.
Definitely.
And so that was my awakening to basketball. And then I became a rabid fan after that. But prior to that, it was all football for me.
I think my first Razorback basketball memory would have had to have been playing Jordan in Pine Bluff.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the hype around that. And then things were a little fuzzy after that, but I remember Alvin Robertson and Klein being on the basketball Olympic team in '84, and how great of a team that was, because they had Bobby Knight and Jordan and all these guys. And somewhere in all of that, I remember Sidney Moncrief being on the cover of Sports Illustrated for the Milwaukee Bucks, doing something, whatever.
Yes, I remember Moncrief's first Sports Illustrated cover, which was the
Tomahawk
dunk, and I think that was in '78.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Super Sid.
Super Sid.
We joke on here all the time that all big sport events in the world, or in America, all roads lead through Arkansas one way or the other. And sometimes we'll be talking about something, and everybody will look at each other and go, oh, there's a dude from Arkansas involved in that. And we'll figure out who it was, because it does seem that there's a lot of big events, Razorbacks or someone from Arkansas are definitely involved in. Okay, so let's continue on here, Tom. So besides Razorback basketball, and not counting like your local high schools or anything, what other teams do you remember sort of picking up as a kid once you went beyond the scope of the Razorback basketball team?
76ers.
76ers.
Dr. J.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah.
I probably paid more attention to NBA. I liked Razorback basketball, but I caught in on the Celtics, Lakers,
Yep.
76ers craze, and watched the finals. And
around 82, was it, when they beat somebody in the finals, Moses Malone and Dr. J and all of them? Yeah, I was.
Yeah, they were
Andrew Toney.
Them and the Celtics seemed like they were in the Eastern Conference Finals every year, and who was going to get to play the Lakers?
Mark Ivoroni and Bobby Jones.
Bobby Bones.
Wasn't that right? Wasn't he one of them?
I don't remember Ivoroni on there, but Maurice Cheeks,
Andrew Toney, Moses Malone,
Caldwell Jones, Dr.
Robert
J.
Parrish.
And then soon, not too many years later, Charles Barkley joined in. But that was my first basketball exposure, was Moses Malone and Dr. J, for sure.
I was a Sixers fan too, but I became a fan, and I want to say it was the '77 finals. The Sixers were playing the Portland Trailblazers in the finals, and the Sixers, it was the first year for Dr. J on the Sixers, and they had, who ended up changing his name to World Be Free, but I think it was Lloyd Free at the time, and they were loaded, and they played the Portland Trailblazers, who had a rookie named Bill Walton.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And the Trailblazers won.
Yeah, that was the headband.
But I was a Sixer fan locked in after that.
I didn't know that about. I kind of knew that about him. I didn't know that about you, and that's really interesting that all three of us, that was our first sort of favorite NBA team. And I will say I picked up being a fan of the NBA just in general in that exact sort of moment because of Bird and Magic hitting the league too. I didn't really have a dog in that fight because I was watching Dr. J, but obviously that was a big stepping stone moment for the NBA, and we were all kind of like right there. So that's really interesting. So while I'm on you, Tom, what about football? College or pro, around that same so you're talking being 10ish years old when you start paying attention to the NBA. Were you on the NFL yet at that point, do you think?
I think so.
The Steelers?
Yeah, it was Steelers and a little bit of college. I guess it was later on though, like Brian Bosworth.
Oh yeah, that was the late '80s. Yeah, that was the late '80s.
Because I was right there on the edge, almost in Oklahoma where I grew up.
And all roads go through Arkansas. He got banned in the bowl game against Arkansas. Okay, so that makes sense. Steve, what about you? I know who you enjoy as an NFL team, but was that first?
But no, they weren't the first. I mean, I remember early on, starting to pay attention but not really having a team. I distinctly remember watching a Raiders game with Daryl LaMonica as the quarterback, with my dad. And my dad was not an NFL fan, so I have no clue why we were watching it, but I remember that. But I think the first team that was really I considered to be my team was the Dolphins when they won back-to-back Super Bowls. But, I really wasn't passionate about it. But, I considered them my team at that time.
That would have been Bob Greasy, Jim Kick, Mercury Morris, Larry Zonka.
All those guys, yeah.
Wow, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Laces out. Anyway,
Eagles.
You were on the Eagles first because
second. It was Pittsburgh, and then Randall Cunningham came along.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Eagles were big, and they were always on TV. So.
But you weren't a Jaworski Polish Rifle Eagles fan?
No,
okay.
I wasn't.
Right. Just
but
wondering.
I got a funny story about the Eagles. Remember the letter jackets that everybody had to have for like Christmas
from Sears.
From Sears.
Yep.
Well, you could never get a Steelers. Absolutely could not get a Steelers. And so my mom asked me what my second favorite team was, and I was like, Eagles.
Eagles, okay.
So she goes to order this jacket, and on Christmas morning, I'm like all set to get either a Steelers or an Eagles letter jacket. And I'm opening it up, and guess what I bust out?
Cardinals.
Seahawks. Worse.
Oh, because they look because of the head
of
a
bird.
It's the head of the.
She was like, I knew it was a bird. I just couldn't remember which one. So I opened up a Seattle Seahawks, which were they were pretty bad at the time, and nobody.
Their old logo was literally the head of the bird with the beak on the front of it and everything.
Now I would love to have that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because it was like teal with that old logo and silver sleeves.
Oh,
it
man.
was slick.
So
I hated it at the time. I wore it one time.
Yeah. But you remember LaMonica? That goes a pretty good ways back.
Yeah, that was
Steve.
way back, and I remember, and I don't know why I remember it, but they were playing somebody. I think it was the Chargers, and it was a shootout. It was one of the old AFC games, and it was a shootout and high scoring, and and I just remember them talking about the old man LaMonica got one more in him, and and I think it was probably his last season.
Yeah.
But I, for whatever reason, I remember that.
Well, I've said on here, and there's I've got the different events we've done an episode on, but one of them was my first memory, which I remember the Cowboys beating the Broncos in the Super Bowl, which was the season of 77, I believe, but the Super Bowl bled over into 78. And that was Tony Dorsett's rookie year. So I kind of got involved right then in the NFL because my family was, and I've talked about that on here a lot, but where I grew up, you were either a Saints or Cowboys fan, and there wasn't a whole lot else. And my dad and uncle, for whatever reason, were Roger Staubach guys, and that's how the Cowboys curse happened to me. But as far as specific events and saying, I remember that on TV, I remember where I keep going back to is Irv Cross and Jimmy the Greek Snyder and Phyllis George and Musburger on CBS. That was my, and we joked on another podcast about how back then you probably had a 30-minute lead in to the game. None of this 2 hours of hollering at each other like they do now. And you got your interview of the week. Usually it was like, okay, let's talk to whoever, Roger Staubach. And that was Phyllis. And then Irv and Brent broke down the game itself. And Jimmy came in and told you how to bet. And you were done. Kick the ball.
Yeah.
It's none of this hours and hours of pregame. But
there was no competition. That was the only show. And so, if you were an NFL guy, you watched that religiously.
Yeah. And then, of course, Monday Night Football, I can remember Cosell, and definitely Dandy Don Meredith was one of my favorites. And, I can remember being young enough to ask my dad, can I stay up and watch football? And he'd, of course, say, yeah. I remember, like I said, I don't think I was watching that particular night, but I remember John Lennon being announced on there that he had died. I do remember watching Tony Dorsett run that 99-yarder against the Vikings with 10 men on the field. And that was I was watching that happen. So it's really interesting to me what things kind of pop in your head when you get to going, well, man, I was 8 years old when that happened, but I definitely remember because it wasn't because you saw it on YouTube. It was because you remember it because that it actually happened. There was
You saw it live.
you saw it, and so it was a big event in our house to huddle around the TV, after church and watch football together for sure. So, and we all struggle sometimes to remember some of the announcers. I can go back to the crew that I mentioned. I remember when Terry Bradshaw tried to do color analysis on CBS after his playing career. And of course,
I think it only lasted a year.
It didn't sound very good. It wasn't very, they moved him into the studio. But I can remember the Dan Fouts after he got through playing. He became, and it was like Dick Enberg and Dan Fouts or whoever. Yeah. And so we've kind of kicked around on another podcast earlier than this one about the names that we remember. But, obviously we remember Madden and Pat Summerall, thank you. But I can't remember who was with Summerall before that, but I know I listened to Summerall before Madden came along. I just don't remember who it would have been.
Yeah, I don't recall.
And somebody told me Paul Hornung was an announcer on TV. I don't know. But
it seems like I remember him, but I don't remember him in the NFL. I remember him on like Notre Dame broadcast
that's probably
or something
true.
like that.
Well, and I keep throwing the name Bob Trumpy out there because I know I saw games that Bob Trumpy was the and that's probably when NBC was involved. And they'd have that late Dan Fouts game out on the coast or something like that. The Raiders, you probably never saw them play at noon.
No. I mean, unless they came to the East Coast.
Yeah.
But even with then, rarely did we get that game.
Well, and that was another thing we have talked about, but I want to hear y'all's take on it. How does it feel now to know that you can watch any game you want, but how did it feel as a Raiders fan in Augusta, if that's where you were living when you kind of became a Raiders fan? How did it feel knowing you had no hope of watching them maybe 2 or 3 times a year because you weren't in their territory and we didn't have ESPN and so forth?
Tommy, you may disagree, but back in those days, you didn't know any different. I mean,
Right.
It just was what it was.
Right.
So,
Right.
There was no, oh man, I wish, we could get more. It was just you got the games that they teed up for you, and no other options.
And you enjoyed it, right?
Yeah, you were happy. You were happy to have it. Yeah,
I'm watching football.
That's what I think. I think we were just so happy to get to watch football.
I think that leads to guys our age, though, to be able, if football's on, for me, if the NFL's on,
I'm watching.
I can sit down and watch it. I don't care who's playing. Where other guys that may be younger than us, it needs to be their team or a team they're interested in, or somebody they've got going in fantasy or whatever for them to watch it.
That's true. Tom, what about? Do you remember any other magazines other than Sports Illustrated that you might have taken a peek in back in the day to read up on some of this stuff? You remember Sport magazine? That's the second one that I always bring up. Do you remember
it? Poor Man Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, Poor Man Sports Illustrated. Yeah, the Sport.
I don't recall that.
Yeah.
I never had it.
Steve, what do you remember other than Sports Illustrated and Sport? Was there anything?
Those the only two I remember. We grew up. Where I grew up, it was in the middle of nowhere, and I remember getting probably more in my teenage years and finally being able to afford a Sports Illustrated subscription. But I do remember Sport. I don't remember any of the others.
Yeah, Sports Illustrated was a big deal because it was weekly.
Yeah.
Thursday or Friday, you got that thing in the mail. It was something to look forward to.
Well, and that's where you learned about all the other sports as well.
Well,
you weren't getting that coverage.
No, I don't remember ever seeing the NBA back then until the finals.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was on for the playoffs, but I didn't care, I guess, but I don't remember just a regular Saturday afternoon NBA game. I'm sure they were. I just don't remember them. But, and by the way, we're all talking about the 3-channel days. Am I right? For the most part.
For the most part.
I think we got cable in 81 or 2. I was middle school or elementary school. What are you shaking your head about? Did you have 3 channels in Van Buren?
Yeah.
And an antenna?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, we didn't get cable.
No,
ever. I got cable when I went to college.
That's what I got. You went to college later than I did, but that's when I got cable when I went to college. Yeah. And that was probably 82 or something like that.
Yeah, well, we had ESPN, but there wasn't anything on it back then. Back then, it took it 4 or 5 years to really do anything other than highlights, and you could watch a heck of a dart tournament on it or something. What
Well, I
do
think
you're
that's-
wanting to say something?
No,
What-
I was
what
just. I
is-
think it's interesting, though. I mean, I was thinking about the wide
wide
world
world of sports.
I
yeah,
mean,
man.
I think just like I feel like our generation was like maybe exposed to. I mean, I know kids today have access to everything, but when sports came on TV when I was a kid, it didn't matter if it was skiing,
Right.
downhill skiing,
Which
water
it was
skiing.
on NBC
Yeah.
or ABC Wide
and
World
I
of
would
Sports.
watch it. And so that was, I mean, I think that's like you were asking earlier how I got it, like interested in
That-
sports or just, I mean, it was just like, I don't know what, I was just drawn to it and the Olympics and all of that. But
Yeah,
I don't know. It was a broad range of sports for me. It wasn't just like
Well,
one team or one
That's
sport.
because you had 3 channels and whatever was on, and you watched it, and they didn't overlap a whole lot. I mean, I remember the Wide World of Sports. What I remember about it, other than the weird stuff like downhill skiing and whatever,
Barrel jumping.
a marathon.
Yeah.
I remember that Muhammad Ali would fight,
Yeah.
and then the next week or whatever, they'd finally televise it on the Wide World of Sports or something. So you'd hear Howard Cosell. You already know who won. It's been in the paper, but it was maybe the weekend before in Vegas or Madison Square Garden, and finally the next Saturday they do a replay. But to you, it was might as well have been live.
Absolutely.
You're getting to see Muhammad Ali fight.
Ray Boom Boom Mancini.
Yeah.
Sugar Ray.
Sugar Ray. I watched.
Yeah.
I was big into Sugar Ray and Hearns and Sugar Ray and Durant. What was his name?
Roberto
Duran.
Duran.
Oh, Durant.
And I was big into those, and that's how I saw those. I didn't have freaking HBO or Showtime to turn on and watch that stuff back
Marvin
then.
Hagler. Yep.
Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Yeah, those were so. I definitely remember the boxing. I definitely remember the weird sports on there. That reminds me of, I think the lead-in for that, whether it was on that channel or not, what I watched before that was Marlon Perkins'
Mutual of Omaha.
Mutual of Omaha,
Wild Kingdom.
Wild Kingdom led into Wild World of Sports. Now, you may have had to switch a channel to see it, but it seems like one was on at like 11 and one came on at like 1 or something. And before both of those was Mid-South Wrestling, by the way.
Yeah, which
I was
watched
watching
as
that.
well.
Steve, there's my. We'll have to do Mid-South Wrestling one
Yep,
day, Steve.
yep.
Because okay, so we mentioned this earlier. I want to go back to it because it's always a fun topic. You said you got a leather jacket from Sears. So did I. I got a Cowboys wool with the fake leather sleeves. What do y'all remember about merchandise? Anything, anywhere, any kind? What do you remember about merchandise? Steve, do you remember how did that
Yeah, it was
happen?
Sears catalog.
Sears
I mean,
catalog.
That's really the only outlet.
That's
Yeah.
always going to be the answer to that question for our age.
Yeah. I mean, it may have changed a little bit by the time, but not. I can't imagine by the time you guys came along that it was much.
It wasn't.
different.
No, until I got no. I didn't. I guess if you went to a stadium, you could go to a pro shop. But
Yeah. I remember. You're talking about your disappointment with your mom. Getting the Seahawks jacket.
That's pretty
instead of
funny.
the Eagles
That's
jacket.
hilarious.
When I was really beginning to watch the NFL seriously, and my parents paying attention to me, watching it, I really I had some teams I kind of liked but weren't really passionate about. But I had one team that I passionately disliked, and that was the Dallas Cowboys.
Same.
And
I know.
the only
I
thing
totally understand that.
I've got a picture. I'm the baby of 9, and so every year or two at Christmas we'd all line up together and take our big family picture. And I've got a picture of me when I'm about of the whole family, and I'm standing in the middle with my bowl haircut and my Dallas Cowboys shirt on because that's what Mom ordered.
oh my God, they're easy targets. I get it, man. I do.
It took Shon years of like coercing and I can finally tolerate the Cowboys now.
Well, I can't. So
I mean, it was like deep. It was like,
well-
I was a Steelers fan, and
Yeah,
you
and
hated
they were the enemy.
You hated the Cowboys.
it does beg the question how these things happen, because I was I don't know what happened with Steve and Josh because they're not the same. Josh is a big Jacksonville fan.
Yep.
Was that because he wanted to pick an expansion team more or less to start from scratch with?
He was a big Cowboys fan early on. Now
They broke him. That
my-
makes sense. They broke his spirit.
Well, my mother-in-law worked at Alltel for a long time.
And they were
And when
Jacksonville.
When Jerry first bought the Cowboys, there was such a connection with the Alltel execs and the Cowboys that my in-laws were going down to the Cowboys games a lot, and they would take Josh and Matt, who you guys know as well, and because they're about the same age, and so Josh was a big Cowboys fan for years, and then they took them one year on Thanksgiving, and the Cowboys played the Jaguars on Thanksgiving, and Josh he'll tell you today he became a Jaguar fan that day.
Well, I thought you were going to say, if I'm not mistaken, Jacksonville Stadium was first. Alltel Stadium was their first naming right. That's why I thought you were going to say that. That's interesting. I didn't. When Dylan was born, everybody joked, "Oh, he's going to be a Cowboys fan." I didn't force that on him at all. As a matter of fact, I let him just do his thing, and I wonder to this day if he did what maybe I did as a kid, and he picked up on a player, and that led him to a team. When he was a tyke, he knew who Peyton Manning was. Unfortunately, Peyton was at the very end of his career, so Dylan became aware of him as a Colt, and then followed him into the Broncos, and then he was gone.
Yeah.
And then he was kind of like, well, I ain't rooting for the Broncos without Peyton, so I guess I'll be a Cowboys fan. Poor kid. And Tom, I don't know, does Evan have a preference at home? Your son, he's a teenager. Does he have a team preference in the NFL?
He does not watch a lot of sports.
Well, he plays a lot of sports, but he wouldn't necessarily agree with you on it anyway. I just think that's where we are in life now. Dylan's threatened 100 times to change to being a Texans fan.
But I think you're right. I think it's more of like following personalities and players today than it is teams.
Yeah,
and I'm guilty of it. But
they move so much too.
Well, I mean, probably when you started following the Steelers, that was Terry Bradshaw and Franco Harris and all those guys, right?
Yeah, but
so they had big personalities, and I'm sure you were drawn to that. For me, when I became a Raiders fan, it was the Stabler years. Stabler, Biletnikoff, Branch. Ted Hendricks, all of those guys. So they were big personalities, and I became a fan of the Raiders really when they beat the Vikings in the Super Bowl. And that kind of cemented it for me, and they had so many personalities, and they were just fun to watch.
Well, speaking of that, the reason I think also that we stayed attached to teams is because the team stayed together.
Yeah,
there wasn't as much free agency, and I think that made it a lot easier on kids to not have to keep up with. I mean, imagine being an NBA fan right now. I can't keep up even casually at who's on what team anymore. But I knew on the Cowboys, I could have probably named you their starting lineup for 7-8 years in a row because it didn't change by more than a couple of guys.
Yeah.
And that's just the way they built teams back then. I can tell you the Steelers lineups because I had to watch them beat the Cowboys in the Super Bowl every year, it seemed like. And everybody knew who the Raiders were because of all their crazy personality types. So I think that had a lot to do with that, too, was picking up on personalities and the fact that those personalities stayed together. But who doesn't know Mean Joe Green and Coca-Cola commercial?
Yeah.
You had to love that even if you didn't like the Steelers.
I got a tear in my eye now.
Yeah, I bet you do.
There you go, kid.
Tom does, too, but it's because of his Seahawks jacket.
Yeah. I wish I had that jacket.
Sweet if you
all right, so let me ask y'all this. Do y'all remember having any favorite sports announcers or writers as an individual? Do you remember being a big fan, even up to today? Like, I'll give you an example. He just retired before this football season, but Peter King was my guy going all the way back to the probably late 90s when the internet – I was reading him in Sports Illustrated, but Peter King was always my guy. I read Monday Morning Quarterback for eons in the morning on Monday mornings. And then as far as announcers, I was always a Pat Summerall guy. I loved him and Madden together. But do y'all have people like that writers or announcers, either one that you really thought a lot of or – can remember? Or
writers for me, it was Orville.
That's the Razorback guy.
Yeah, I mean, if you were a Razorback fan,
sure.
You either loved Orville or later on you were a Wally Hall guy, and Wally, everybody transitioned to Wally after Orville retired. But from a local writer, it was him. From a national writer, what was it, Dr. Z in Sports Illustrated?
Paul Zimmerman.
I really remember because he always was writing about the NFL, and I was a big NFL guy.
He was the biggest advocate ever for linemen in the NFL. He could really break down line play, unlike most writers didn't care, but he did.
Yeah, so from a writer perspective, those are the guys I remember. Now, from an announcer perspective, I distinctly remember when Frank Broyles, the old Arkansas athletic director, was doing color with Keith Jackson on ABC game.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was, but it wasn't that I necessarily liked Frank's announcing, although he was pretty good. I mean, he was real Southern. But Keith was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And
he's been mentioned on here many times. Yeah.
So on the college side, it was him. But I was a Dick Enberg fan. I thought Dick Enberg was really good.
Sure.
I always enjoyed his calls.
What about you?
I guess it's a little bit later, but I read Wally Hall.
Yeah.
I'll always fondly remember Dandy Don and Howard Cosell on Monday Night Football. I mean, that was like, wasn't it Dandy Don that was like saying, "Turn out the lights, the party's over." I mean, that's one of my earliest memories of NFL is some singing that song on a.
If I'm not mistaken, he was the inspiration for the Mac Davis character in North Dallas 40 because of how kind of a country music / quarterback type. That was him. I would agree with all of those. And let me add that I thought occasionally you get a baseball broadcaster because regionally you get like the 4th most popular game of the week. And every now and then I'd hear somebody like a Jack Buck and go, I thought he was a baseball guy, but it would be Jack Buck actually doing like the 4th-string NFC game of the week or something. So there were some very talented people out there, probably the heyday of it. We always talk about, with my buddies from home, we always talk about Harry Carey because of the Cubs and what impact that had on our lives, getting cable and then suddenly seeing Cubs and Braves games every day when we lived in Cardinals territory and couldn't watch the Cardinals.
Oh, it was really interesting, with the advent of cable and being able to watch the Cubs.
Yeah.
Pardon me, every day. Because Harry, who had, if you think about it objectively, Harry, who had toiled, worked for several different teams and, and kind of bounced around and, was kind of a local legend in whatever town he was in. Now suddenly he's got this national platform and, he's a national star all of a sudden where, which I thought was really neat for a guy that was already old by that point in time and was at the tail end of his career to be able to have such a big limelight at the end of it.
I would even say he was a cultural phenomenon by the end of the 80s for sure because just suddenly people all over the country through WGN are finding out who this guy was, and he was entertainment for us. I mean, we got a kick out of him on a hot day up there drinking beer and barely getting the words out by the end of the telecast. And there's
you or him?
Him.
Okay.
There's great pictures of him with his pants down around his ankles and his feet are in a tub of ice, sitting there in his boxers, and he's got a Budweiser right there within reach. I mean, that dude. I said on another podcast he would be a gazillionaire today with podcasts and internet shows and all that, where he didn't have to really mind his P's and Q's so much. He'd have been a superstar in the media right now.
Right now.
Okay, all right, well, guys, anything else about your background and how you got to be the sports nerds that you are that you want to add? Because we've kind of knocked out the topics that I think are sort of indicative of, once you answer them, we kind of get a idea of who you are as a sports fan. And by the way, right now you're still a Raiders fan, correct? Steve, Tom is all over the place in the NFL. I'm telling you, he just goes where the wind blows. No, I'm kidding. I don't know who you really like right now.
That's what I was saying.
It's kind of all over the place.
It's not the Steelers anymore, and it's just all over the place. It depends on my fantasy.
I will
players.
say that when you and I,
Bills though, I do like the Bills right now.
When you and I get together for playoff games or something, we usually decide ahead of time who we're going to root for, so it doesn't cause any problems. All right, I'm going to end episode 6 right here, and we'll take a break and come back in a second.
Thank you for joining us on Gen X Classic Sports, where nostalgia meets the thrill of the game. Tune in next time for more insightful discussions and memorable moments, brought to you by Pine Street Productions. Until then, stay passionate about sports and keep the memories alive.